Hey friends, I'm glad you clicked on this video. This is going to be an important and helpful one. I've tried to do interviews with people who've gone through different facets of the disaffiliation process from the United Methodist Church. Some people have had it easier than others. Some people have had it really hard. And so I just think it's helpful. I'm trying to minister to people in the Global Methodist Church and build up our connection, but I'm also trying to minister to those who are left behind. And a lot of people really have had a rough go of it. And so that's the purpose of today's interview. And if you don't know who I am, I'm a Global Methodist elder named Jeffrey Rickman. I'm in rural northeastern Oklahoma. I and my two churches went through the disaffiliation process, more than a year ago now, I think. Yeah, absolutely. And now we're on to good green pastures, but that doesn't mean that I'm happy to leave people behind. And indeed, there are some conferences that are still allowing churches to disaffiliate. There are other conferences that are not, and a lot of local churches are looking at the possibility of just walking away from properties that they've maintained and built for decades, if not over a century. It's a hard position to be in, and a lot of people are just really siloed. A lot of churches are isolated, and they don't really know what's going on, and they don't really have many examples to turn to of people just to walk them through what it was like for them, what it might be like if they walked down this road. And so the Reverend Mark Weekley is in North Carolina, and he and I made contact, I don't know, a couple months ago now. And he and his church have just a really harrowing story. And I was really glad to learn that I was a helpful resource to him and his church in the midst of that. So I'm just going to urge you, if this is at all relevant to you, to spend time in this interview with Mark, but also to consider sharing it with other people that you know are in a similar predicament, just so they don't feel isolated and kind of outnumbered and kind of cornered, and that's where a lot of churches are right now. So I'm hoping that this is a blessing to you and your church. So I think the only other thing I wanted to say in setting this up before introducing you to Mark was part of what I'm trying to model and do on Plain Spoken is how to talk about unholy things without becoming unholy, how to talk about things that nurture anger and resentment without getting angry and resentful. And so that's not to say that I'm not going to let Mark tell his story on his own terms, but what he and I are going to be striving to do is not foster the darkness or resentment or hatred, but just to spread good, clean information. And then, my temptation always is, don't let facts ruin a good story. But also we understand that God does judge liars. And so Mark and I both feel accountable to speak the truth in love. And so that's what we're going to be doing here. So with that in mind, this is Reverend Mark Weekley. He's taking a drink at the last second. Mark, I want you to tell people just who you are, what your history in Methodism and in pastoral ministry is. And then once we have a good sense of who you are, then we'll turn to your story in your current church context.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks for having me today, Jeffrey. I lived in Western North Carolina, other than going to seminary to Candler School of Theology in Emory for 3 years for most of my life. And in fact, was raised in parsonages and in churches across the conference. I'm was a second generation United Methodist clergy. My father is retired and lives here nearby with my mother. I grew up in those churches and just had a profound sense of God and the Lord's presence in my life, and attribute that to the worship, the direction, the guidance, the mentoring, the love of the people of the churches in the conference in which I grew up in. From there, after graduating, I went to a United Methodist college, Brevard College, for a couple of years and got an associate's degree there. And then went to a state university and finished up. Along the way, camping ministry from my conference was hugely influential and a part of my faith, but my calling also in life and into ministry. And then went to Candler School of Theology, as I said, in Atlanta. Came right out, was ordained deacon, then elder, began serving churches, first as an associate, served small churches most of the way, and then some small town churches. All total, 7 churches in the conference over 29 years of ministry
Mm.
until July of 2023, when I decided that it was time for me to prepare to depart at the end of the year. And so at that point, the church that I was at was going through the process of disaffiliation, or trying to receive a vote to do that. And I find myself now as a global Methodist pastor, pastoring a church in the same community made up primarily of those who were disaffected and really shown the door at their church, at the Blair Road United Methodist Church. And so it's been an incredible and just crazy year, to be honest, in ministry for me. But that's where I come from and how it is I find myself at this place and time. And it's been a tremendous journey. It truly, truly has.
Remind me, so Western North Carolina is the United Methodist Conference you came out of, and is that Carter or Shelton that's currently the bishop there?
It is Carter, yes.
Okay, so I did one segment on Carter making a public statement about the what people are allowed to do and say and not do and say after disaffiliating from the denomination. He seemed to have kind of an interesting mentality in leadership. I want to go back more in your life story. You grew up. Your father was a United Methodist pastor. I heard that correctly? Okay, he's retired now. How has and you don't have to speak to this if you don't want to, but how has all this crisis of disaffiliation impacted him, if at all?
Yes, he's in his mid-80s and slowing down a lot, and including mentally. So I don't know that it's affecting him hugely, and he's not active in ministry anywhere. But yeah, he's still United Methodist, as all pastors. I think that most of them that retired as United Methodists have remained. He really worried about me and my future and my ministry, where this was going to lead me, the effects that it was going to have. There were some rifts between friends, but nothing that was unsustainable in his experience. And I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, to be a retired clergy person in the United Methodist Church, depending on what conference you're in, there are some that have really paid a price to affiliate with the GMC instead, losing a number of benefits that they paid into all their professional lives. And then, some people haven't felt the need to do that. Depending on what region you're in, there are still many United Methodist churches that are faithful to biblical doctrines and not in step with the larger body's decisions. I haven't gotten a sense about Western North Carolina. I would assume that there are still several conservative churches left in the fold, but that the bulk left. Would that be a correct assumption?
I would say that's accurate, Jeffrey. Yes. There are certainly evangelical conservative people in churches, in United Methodist churches, that don't know what to do now. There's a lot of consternation about that.
Yeah.
Even clergy now, because I think there was a real fear, and in my own journey, going from United Methodist to GMC, and the 3 months out of which I was really not connected to any group. There was a real sense of loneliness in ministry, collegially, in terms of being a part of the corporate church or an entity like a conference. I have a couple of colleagues I'm having lunch with last week and then this week, still in the UMC, and now they're finding themselves tremendously lonely, feeling sidelined and feeling, really outcast, because they stayed UMC with understanding that they would still be able to be who they want to be and feel called to be theologically, and they're finding that especially challenging.
Could you speak a little bit more about, so I've done some interviews with conservative clergy who say, I'm staying, I've been told I have a place, I have every confidence to believe that I'll continue to have a place, but you're alluding to the sense that at least some have, that there really isn't a place for them, and I think the word you used was sidelined, but can you speak at all to what they are experiencing and feeling right now at this point?
I think, first of all, a lack of connection with clergy that have left already, that used to be a part of the family the Western North Carolina Conference. And but I think secondly, just sidelined in being able to speak and share from their heart what they feel led to speak and share.
Because the fabric has shifted, and things that were once okay to speak publicly about are now something akin to verboten, or just no longer in keeping with the community ethics that of the people who are now in the majority, I guess. So it isn't that they've been told, hey, you can't say this sort of stuff anymore. It's just more that the identity of the group has changed.
Yes, and I would say that that Bishop Carter has had a lot to do with that, setting the tone for that, but also moving things in the direction of the Western Conference being more progressive. I think that's just who he is. I think he tried to wrap up the disaffiliation votes and opportunities for churches quickly in 2023 in order to move on, and he has done that. And so with especially the change in understanding of sexual ethic of United Methodism, even amongst clergy, there's a real shock, I think, amongst some United Methodists that think, well, I didn't think that things were going to change this quickly. And there are some clergy that I think have concerns about that too.
Yeah, so you grew up in the UMC, then you went to seminary. I'm kind of curious about at what point you came to understand that it was going to be that drifting leftward liberal theology, progressivism might be a problem down the road. When did you first take note of that competing theology, and when did you start getting really concerned about it?
Yeah, I think definitely my first semester at seminary.
That's the first you ever noticed it?
Yeah, I would say as far as just being upfront and a part of the conversation. It's probably was a part of the conversation in churches, in conference leadership, but I was still young, wasn't really active and involved in that back in Western North Carolina. But in academic setting, of course, there's freedom of discussion and ideas, and I mean there was quite a bit of liberation theology, even LGBTQ teachings about Scripture, and trying to force Christianity through that framework was at work then and there. And so it was the process of seminary is quite fascinating. As you know, it's something that's meant to challenge you, and I was certainly challenged. But there were just 3 or 4 people that I really connected with there that I think felt that Christ is the Lord of life, crucified and for us. And I did not find that feeling and that passion amongst many of the people in seminary. So
what years did you go to seminary?
That would have been 1991 through 1994.
So am I right in getting the impression from you that in the early 90s at Candler, there were only a handful of traditionalist believers, and that the majority was already leaning pretty far left?
I would not say pretty far left, but I think most were centrist and could entertain sides, and were willing to have that conversation and okay with the UMC and being in ministry in a church that would hold that balance. There were very outspoken, and a couple of very outspoken as well faculty there, but I think by and large it was mostly centrist, and but it was eye-opening to me that you could even consider Christianity and the faith in terms of liberation and sexuality. I would say in the last 10 years in the local church and in conference leadership, things have shifted pretty significantly. That was my experience before leaving at the end of last year. That really, truly, it became dominant, at least in decisions that were being made from above in the district and in the conference.
Do you think it's changed much on the grassroots level?
I would say yes. With the change in legalization of gay marriage, for instance, with the Obergefell decision, Yeah, culturally, I think things have changed over the past 10 years for our country in the
Hmm.
discourse and dialogue.
Hmm.
And that has also happened very much in our United Methodist connection, at least in the Western North Carolina Conference, in local churches, especially amongst clergy and conference leadership.
That's interesting. In Oklahoma, at least, a lot of our lay people, even though they saw the social changes going on, and even though some of them weren't particularly bothered by it, they still had this kind of notion that, like, here, the Bible clearly says this. And so, even though our society might change, the church really shouldn't. That's not an appropriate way in which to change the church. But you didn't notice laity on the ground being able to make that distinction in the same way necessarily in your annual conference. It seemed to you, if I heard you right just now, that once society changed, that the social norms within the church changed as well, and regardless of what the scriptures said about it, people were willing to go with it. Does that sound? Have I been uncharitable in my summary of what I heard?
No, I think that's true. Probably not as much in local church among laity,
Okay.
but definitely it empowered and fueled the clergy and the leadership of the conference to go ahead and move in the directions of more progressive thinking and ways.
Yeah, it's worth remembering that whenever that change was made at Obergefell, there were a lot of people saying, "Hey, this is going to herald a huge social shift," and a lot of people, well, they warned on the front end that this would happen before the decision was even made, and a lot of people said, "Oh, don't be dramatic. Everything's going to be okay." And one of the lessons that I think we need to learn from that is when there are people warning about potential downstream impacts of decisions, perhaps we should take those more seriously than leadership in the past did. So I want to transition now to your story as a pastor, because I know that you had the community you're serving now, you were serving, and then you had to split apart for a bit, and then you came back together. So I don't know how it's best to tell that story, but I feel like we've laid the groundwork well. So just take us through that, and then I'll ask some clarifying questions along the way.
Sure, I was at Blair Road United Methodist Church, located nearby here. It was even in December of 2022. My church council discussed, because people were wondering about disaffiliation, should we consider that? Should we request a vote? We had just had several in my district, the Metro Charlotte district, town hall meetings with the district superintendent and the assistant to the bishop leading those, where people could come from churches in the Metro district to ask questions about disaffiliation. It was very open, conversational. There was a presentation, of course, and very much it was, don't worry about it. The door's not going to close next year. There's not going to be, whenever we get to a general conference, whenever that's held, no changes are going to happen. Things are just going to smoothly go along as possible. And my people were good with that, and I was good with that.
Just
And
to be
so we said,
clear,
well,
is the door
yeah,
closed in Western North Carolina now?
absolutely. It was slam shut, yes, December 31 of
Okay.
last year.
All right. I just wanted to make sure that that was a misstatement on their part when they gave these assurances. All right. Keep going.
Yeah, so we had a bishop that retired that fall, and I believe it was that fall, and Bishop Carter took on oversight of our conference in the interim uh, until he came January 1 of 2023 as the sole bishop for our conference. And in other words, he relocated in the Western Conference and took leadership of it solely. Things changed quickly and dramatically. And in March of that year, there was a letter issued by the bishop to laity and clergy alike that said, we're coming to a time where this whole conversation of disaffiliation is coming to an end. He had scheduled, to his credit, a called annual conference in April of that year to handle some churches that already had requested and voted for disaffiliation. And there were a good number of them. But then he also said any churches that would like to to have a voter disaffiliation must let us know in our office by July 1st of this year. And the vote must be taken, if that is allowed, in September of that year. And then December 31st, there will be no more talk about it, and we'll be done altogether with it. So things change quickly between don't worry about it, let's see what happens at General Conference. There's not going to be any change here in our locale, to very much saying you need to go ahead and decide, are you with us or are you not? Where the great concern came was at annual conference that year. This is 2023. And the bishop had his comments and his conversation with the clergy session at annual conference. And very much he said to the clergy and laity alike that here is the direction in which we are moving as a conference, and I'm leading us. And if you can't live with that, or you don't want to support that, you need to get out now. There's the door.
To be clear, the direction that he was making explicit was towards the theological left, or was he stipulating something else?
Yes, towards the theological left,
okay.
Definitely so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even a democratic process. It was just pretty much akin to what Thomas Bickerton said on the floor of General Conferences. We're on this train, it's going this direction. If you don't like it, you need to just get out of here.
It was a declaration, yes. And it was giving a deadline for you to be out. And at that point, my people were like, oh, my goodness, you mean we aren't going to be able to wait to General Conference? Because that was scheduled 2024 for this year. And we were told absolutely not. And so there was a great scuffle about what are we going to do about this. So we had conversation in local church amongst the church council. We had representatives from all the groups in the church, ministry groups, Sunday school classes, community ministries, everyone that had a stake. And it was rich and good conversation about what do we need to do? Do we need to request a vote, or are we good just remaining United Methodist? And in all of that, the conversation group made a presentation to the church council, and the church council voted that they wanted to request a vote from the district, from the conference for disaffiliation. And they did that just by the deadline of July 1st. And at that point, things changed quickly in terms of my communication with the district and the conference. I told my church leaders, you all need to own this. If you want to vote for disaffiliation because you feel passionate about it, you need to request this. You need to come to terms with this and decide, are you really in for this? And all of the key leaders in the church council and the council as a majority said yes, they were. And so they communicated with the district superintendent, but quickly my relationship changed with the conference when that happened.
So were you clear in your heart yet that you wanted to leave?
No. In December of 2023, I really thought that I would be fine to just continue on until retirement. I'm 57 now. I've got maybe 6 or 7 more years of ministry that I need to do at least, and hopefully more after that. And I figured that things in the churches that I was serving, they were primarily traditional, basically conservative congregations. But something changed when the bishop said there was a deadline, that there would be no more talk of this after that. And especially when a vote was requested, there was great resistance, I would say even just stirring of the pot and pushback from granting a vote of disaffiliation in that church.
Let's get clear on the demographics of your church, because across the whole denomination, some annual conferences have been very amenable with smaller, rural, poorer churches wanting to go, hey, God bless you on your way. We'll facilitate this. Would that qualify as your church that you were serving, or were you guys perhaps larger, more moneyed, more resourced, and it would hurt the institution to lose you?
Yeah, I think it. I think it was definitely a jewel that didn't want to be let go of. And part of that is it's on a 26-acre piece of property by the Beltway in Charlotte, and it makes it a very choice piece of property. But also, it's been a strong church in its 50, 60 years of existence. Multiple staff, 7 staff people when I was there. And yeah, I would say that it was significant enough that it garnered attention. And I think was given resistance about receiving a vote, but it was ultimately granted.
The vote was granted, but in the meantime, the conference started treating you differently.
Yes, my relationship with the district superintendent, I would say that my relationship with colleagues had started to change at the beginning of that year. I think there was a conversation going on in the conference among the clergy to which I was not privy, if you know what I mean, Jeffrey. That
I'm not sure I do know what you mean. Do you feel like there were private gatherings of clergy going on where they were picking a party line and who they would target to feel some pressure? Or what do you think caused that shift?
I think that it just became clear when Bishop Carter began that it really was going to be a new day and a different day. And I think a lot of clergy embraced that and were excited about that being a move in a progressive direction. And I think they just felt like no, I don't know that there was any kind of gathering or
it was just kind of a group collective triumphal celebration before the decision was even officially made. It sounds like, our side has declared victory and we're going to be victorious. We're on the right side of history, and we're not going to be afraid to let people know who are not with us that they're on the wrong side of this thing. So, yeah, okay, I can see how that works.
I would say that back in 2019, after the General Conference, when the biblical sexual ethic was, strongly upheld and affirmed for the nomination, at annual conference that year, things were very different right after that, on the tails of that. With the elections of delegates to go to the next General Conference, things were really ramped up, and there was a great energy and enthusiasm in progressive folks' minds and in their game plan. And I think things have been moving in the direction of that since. And I think when 2024 came around and they knew that December 31st was what 2553 said was the end of it all, they were very excited about that. And Bishop Carter is a great leader for the progressive thinkers in the church.
I'm glad you have the energy to recapitulate all of this, because the temptation is, once you get out, just don't think about it anymore. But it is important to understand our history and where we came from and what errors were made so that we don't reproduce them. So thank you, Mark. All right, I'm going to stop badgering you and let you get back into your story about the church vote, I think, is where you were at.
It was. My 5 key leaders in the church council, who became known in the church as the 5 Dangerfields. You remember Rodney Dangerfield with the tie, not getting any respect.
Right, yeah.
Because every single thing from the time that they contacted the district superintendent came back that I don't know that I'm going to allow a vote. That's misinformation. That's not accurate. Things are not going to change. Finally, it came down to the district superintendent and I agreeing that he needed to come to speak to my congregation. And so we had I think it was a Monday or Tuesday night meeting that went on for 2.5 hours, where huge crowd in our church, as large as I'd say our worship attendance on Sunday was there. They had a lot of questions, and he heard them all, and then did a long presentation that really didn't get around to answering the sticky situations. And so people felt very put off by that. I think they felt like they weren't being heard, even though he had listened to the questions. And then the leaders, they kept being told, you're not going to be allowed a vote because you keep disseminating misinformation. Really, they were just sharing what the council had discussed openly. Finally, a vote was given, and the date of it was a Sunday in September. It was right after our second worship service, our contemporary service. and it was very large crowd that day. A lot of members that had not been since I had been pastor there.
Right. Yeah.
But then people that were out of town, planning to be out of town, that stuck around and said, we really feel like this is important for the future of our church.
Mm-hmm.
And so the vote was taken, and it was a very contentious discussion prior to the vote about what we were actually voting for. The church council, the five leaders, had tried to be very clear about if you vote and it is approved that we would disaffiliate, we would leave and take our property with us and be independent or join a Pan Methodist, another denomination of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very confused, just in the way that it was presented. The vote was taken, and ultimately it failed by 2 votes.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so there was, 66% of the people voted to disaffiliate. And so after that, people were just kind of stunned and just walked
losing
out.
by 2 votes. Oh man, that only happened in a few places as large as yours. That's just so, man. Okay,
Yeah.
so let me rewind just real quick, because the charge of misinformation was made all over the place. Do you recall, were they able to point to any specific piece of misinformation that was promoted that was just false in the midst of all that?
It really didn't matter what it was. But even if it was clarifying a previous misinformation that was not acceptable in the DS's eyes, it seems like the more that the 5 leaders and the church council shared with the congregation, the more in jeopardy of having a vote they got to. And so it was really contentious as to whether or not there would be a vote allowed at this point. And I had made known, because it was required by our bishop that clergy let the conference know if and when they were planning to leave by about the same time requested a vote.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had been praying and discerning, discussing with colleagues and people in the church, what am I going to do? And I ultimately decided that I would be leaving, and requested with the conference in writing that I could stay until December 31st, because I really had no idea where I would be going, what I would be doing, apart from the church that I was appointed to at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I shared that letter, and I think part of that, me stating that I was leaving, was part of the tension between the church leaders and the district superintendent. I think he felt like I was trying to lead them out.
Sure.
And I just wanted them to have a vote. I think it was necessary for every church to have that freedom and opportunity, because that's what the General Conference had decided.
Absolutely. And for those who maybe weren't paying attention much at that point, it was made clear that through paragraph 2553, a church needed to clear a full 2/3 of the vote. So 66% is not enough. It needed to be 66.666 plus 1, So it's just, a lot of people got very close to that margin. A lot of churches got very close to that margin, but because they didn't make it, the whole thing could not proceed forward. And so that's the situation that you and your church were in. The only reason I came back to the misinformation bit was I never heard any significant misinformation ever substantiated. I heard the charge everywhere, all over the place. I never heard a single thing that was alleged in a local church that was just flat out false. And so, from what I could tell, the institution just didn't like a lot of very valid, true information, and then just called it misinformation, and essentially threatened the right of local churches to even have that vote if they spoke the truth too much. And it sounds like that's what happened in your local church, and there was confusion, maybe because of what the annual conference. I didn't hear you make this allegation, but when you get to the day of the vote and there's still confusion about what the deal is and what happens after the vote, that says to me that there's been intentional corruption of the information that's been disseminated by the church leadership. So regardless of what those causes were, what you've already substantiated is there was hostility from the annual conference. You had to fight tooth and nail to even get this right that you were guaranteed by paragraph 2553. when the vote finally came, it failed by 2 votes in a situation where membership returned that had not been active for some time, which happened all over the place. Very frustrating. Okay, so
Yeah.
in the meantime, you had already made clear your intention to leave the denomination. So what happened in the aftermath of the vote?
Well, I had requested, as I stated a few moments ago, that I would like to work and remain through the end of 2023, so
Mhm.
until December 31st, and to remain at Blair Road and then just go my way and a new person be appointed.
Mhm.
However, the DS, after the vote, got the staff parish committee together, uh, requested a meeting, and it wanted to do it that week. And my staff parish chair was like, "Well, I don't know that we can get everybody together for this."
When you say
They
do
they need,
it, you mean he wanted to remove you from the pulpit there that week?
yeah, that was his intention, and
Wow.
so really, my staff parish chair resigned over it. Several of my The way the vote was handled, basically the 5 key leaders of the church resigned their positions over it. Lay leader of the church, um, and we had that staff parish meeting the week following the vote, and he pretty much said, you've got this last Sunday, and then you're done here.
Mm.
And I told him and asked, well, you received my letter and said I would like to stay through the end of the year, or I'm not guaranteed an appointment as a United Methodist elder. And he said, well, yes, you are. And he found me a place about 90 minutes away, a 2-point charge, reduction in salary. He was able to find some monies to help, at least with health benefit, and I appreciated that. But pretty much I was sent packing. And in that staff parish meeting right after the vote, my lay delegate to annual conference said to the DS, I don't think this is a good idea. I hope that you would rethink just removing our pastor out from under us,
Mhm.
and just give us some time to process this, and
Mhm.
he'll go his way, and then we will come to terms with being United Methodist. But I think it was probably already scripted that's the way it was going to happen. And after that, um, a group got together of some of the key leaders of the Blair Road Church that had resigned, and then others that were just longing to be a part and not miss out on the community and the fellowship of Blair Road, because they knew it would be very different. And they began worshiping in a local funeral home. They were granted the ability to do that for the next 4 Sundays.
Mm.
And I had left. I was serving 2 new churches appointment far away, and they pretty much on their own. And this is where the story really gets exciting. Said, we cannot allow this to be taken away from us. And what they
Mhm.
were talking about this was the church, and they were thinking of the buildings and the campus that they had all helped to build over the decades and
Mhm.
put their hearts and lives into and raised their children in and been married in and baptized their kids. But really, they were talking about the Holy Spirit and the presence of believers and their love for one another in Jesus. And so they immediately said, we can't let this slip. And they started completely lay-led worshiping the next Sunday,
Mm.
and been going ever since. And over the past year, it's been an incredible series of miracles, more so
Mm.
than I've ever seen in my 29 years of ministry previously, of doors that have just been opened, of the Spirit of the living God using people in ways that never used them when we were at the United Methodist Church down the road. Just incredible things have happened that you just have to say thank you. I mean, there's no other way to explain how something so bad God could use for something so good.
Mhm.
And now we're a growing church. They called me in at the end of December of that year and said, would you be willing to consider appointment as our pastor of the church? And so we
Mhm.
talked to they had since, in I think November, got together with one of the presiding elders of the GMC and said, what would we need to do to establish ourselves as a congregation? And they wanted to do that primarily for two reasons. One, for structure of how the church operates and the accountability that the United Methodist Church is good at and has had, but also the doctrine. They wanted to be able to clearly say, this is what we believe,
Right.
and where we stand on the biblical issues that have forced us out of our home denomination that we've been a part of for so long. And so this past week, we got the great news and got to take tours of a facility that is in our location, in our area here in town, to purchase a church campus
Oh, cool.
that we would be able to take. It's a lot of money, but people are stepping up. People have said all along, there's no way that you can do this. No bank is going to loan you that amount of money. There's no way that you can work this out. You don't have enough energy and excitement and structure yet, and yet it keeps coming together. And I have to say that it is the laity, Jeffrey, in this scenario that have just been faithful servants of God and said, it matters on the rock which we stand. And their persistence and their passion for that, I'm telling you, the reason that I am now their pastor is not because I was their pastor previously at a different denomination church, but because I saw what they were doing in Jesus and for the kingdom of God among one another and in the community here, in outreach and in ministry, even though they didn't have a home. I mean, they were just on fire for God, and the Holy Spirit has been part of it. And it is just amazing. I thank God that I am no longer a part of the UMC simply because I am able to be a part of this. And the GMC movement has been similar to that. I mean, I know that you've been monitoring that and talking to people about that all along. But that is just, there's this spirit that had been missing in the UMC, in my conference, even in my local churches over the past 10, 15 years that I find happening again. And I just give praise to God for it. It's amazing.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who, I mean, it's just a very scary thing to leave everything you've built and start from what feels like ground zero. But it's when you're stripped of the things that give you comfort that you have to lean upon the rock, and there have been so many communities that have experienced very similar things. And I've interviewed a few pastors and very similar, reporting very similar stuff where it looks like, I mean, for your old church lost this vote. They were going to be UMC. You had been carted off to a 2-point charge far away. You couldn't shepherd them to a new place. It looked like both you and the congregation were just going to be demoralized and disrespected at the end. But what ended up happening was, and it does feel, I mean, in the end, it's the Holy Spirit, but also you have to have people that work with the Holy Spirit. And it seems like you had very strong laity. I mean, already when you get to the point, I mean, a lot of people watching this are going to go, I don't know if I and my brothers and sisters in my church, if we could run a church without a pastor. There are a lot just going, I don't know if we could do that. So could you speak for a little bit about what it was that the laity had to do? What gave them the strength and the clarity? What equipped them for the task at hand so that with or without a pastor, they knew what they needed to do?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, they were very grounded in their faith. And so anybody that's going to launch out in an expedition, such as starting a church, it's going to require a lot of faith. And if you're not grounded, you're going to become very discouraged. You're going to doubt in ways that will probably put to rest the movement that you're trying to create or be a part of. So, I think they were very grounded in their faith. I know that to be true. They desired, to be in the Word and to worship. They desired to welcome people into the life of the church and to grow. They desired to be the hands and the feet of Christ in the community to help people and beyond too in missions. And so I think their groundedness in the Word and in the faith was key and was pivotal in that. Secondly, I think, and this is really where the Holy Spirit, I think, is just amazed me and them too, to be quite honest. that there was a core group of leaders that came together, and it was soon after the vote, and they were very discouraged. They didn't know what to do. I think they probably were getting together for a groan session,
Mm.
or to say woe is me. But I think God made very clear to these five couples that they had there amongst them all of the skills and the abilities needed to do such a tremendous thing as to start a community of faith from
Mm.
scratch. And so there's a guy that is he worked in real estate and in properties all of his life. He was just quick to say, I'm going to get on it and find us a place to start meeting, to be able to have a place to rent. There's a guy that's a CPA that knew tax laws and how to start a nonprofit and what that required, and how could they start receiving money and to be able to be an entity. With my lay leader, she was just tremendously connected in the UMC, in our conference and district and with other churches. And she said, well, I'll find out how to contact the Global Methodist Church and see how it is that we can discern whether or not that's the path that we should take. And so all of the things came together. One of them is a musician, blues guitarist, and he said, I'm going to start leading the music on Sunday in the funeral home. I tell you, it will preach on Easter Sunday, because it preached at my church this past Easter Sunday about a church beginning in a place where people are bid farewell in a funeral home. Mm. That was just an amazing thing that happened, how God pulled these five couples together who said, we think right here we've got enough stones to take this thing on. And they did. And lo and behold, less than a year later, we are looking at finding a home of our own and continuing to grow. And so I would say that there was not great discouragement among the people that started this congregation. I would say a big part of that was prayer, being grounded in faith. But also we started, when we found out about the deadline coming that the bishop had said, July 1st, for the vote of disaffiliation, back at our UMC, we started just a prayer walk 3 nights a week. We invited people to come out, and we just walked the property of the church, just praying about, Lord, what would you have us to do? Lead us, show us if we're going to stay here, what ministries would you have us to dream? Where would you like us to be a part of the kingdom more so than we are now here? Mm-hmm. But I think in all of that, just the process of praying about it, there was just a real hunger created within them to anticipate and look for God to use them in ways that they never had done or allowed or been moved to do before.
It's weird. I talk to all kinds of laity and clergy across the connection, and a lot of laity just don't feel equipped to, they would hear this story about these five couples stepping up and just be in awe and just go, we in our church, it'd be wonderful if we had people like that. I'm not sure we have people like that. But then when you hear about, as they hear you talk about a hungering and yearning for walking in the scriptures and an earnest seeking of the Lord in prayer, that's something that surely every church can do. And whether or not you can start off by having a great worship service or even have a place to worship, it does seem like, here, let me say this. I'm curious your reaction. Methodism started off as a lay-led movement in a lot of ways. There were clergy, but not nearly enough to do what needed to get done. So you had very strong laity early on in Methodism. But it's been my distinct impression that over a period of, especially the last century, the laities, they've kind of had their wings clipped. And a lot of them, even though we create like lay leadership training courses and stuff, we kind of give the impression that laity really cannot lead, don't know the right way to lead unless they've taken a bunch of courses and they know the right terminology. I think it's really functioned to deflate a lot of the clergy, laity, so that when these times come, they feel like they don't have what is required. But my understanding from listening to you talk is a great confidence that, look, if you have a hunger and thirst for righteousness, you want to know the Lord, you want to read his scriptures and do this communally in a community of prayer, then you have whatever it takes to do what needs to be done. Would you say anything that strong?
Yeah, I would say it even stronger that until you say it makes no sense and I have no business doing this, but say, Lord, if this is really what you want me to do, I'm going to step out. You don't know what God can do until you take that step. That's faith. That's faith. Yeah, one
And
of
so
the things.
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. We during Lent this past Lent and Easter season, we decided to have a Bible study focused on the what's the Tim Tennant 40 Questions book, which has to do with kind of our basic doctrine and belief, our catechism of the church. And so we thought this is a good time to visit what is it that we truly believe. And so we're worshiping right now in a lodge that we're renting of a civic group. We had to rent classrooms because we have the lodge just on Sunday for worship. We had to rent classrooms at the local Chamber of Commerce. And so we came up with the money. We joined the Chamber of Commerce and got their boardroom for one night. And we put the sign-up sheet out. We said, this is what we're going to be focusing on. We had to rent it for 3 nights to be able to accommodate almost 60 people that said, I want to know what it is that as a Methodist and as a Christian, I should believe and why. And there was great excitement and enthusiasm for that. I was just like, how am I going to teach 3 classes a week? But it was just phenomenal that their hunger for, I think that their desire to know God, and that hunger and thirst for righteousness was there. And I think that's got to be a component to that and stepping out in faith. Yeah. So I want to thank you, Jeffrey, and your plain spoken ministry for encouraging a lot of people, including myself. Man, I was hanging on, watching and hearing the stories of people last fall when I was driving 90 minutes both ways to serve 2 small churches in rural North Carolina. And it was a lonely season. I was not in touch really with hardly any people from my former church, the United Methodist Church that had started the new congregation. But my colleagues didn't want to have anything to do with me. Some of my new ones did, and those that were a part of the global. But your ministry, I think, has helped people to come together and know they're not alone. And I have benefited from that and been blessed by it. And I think the Global Methodist Church has benefited from it. And so I want to say thank you to that, but also encourage people that feel lonely because they are in a United Methodist Church and don't know what to do, to just seek after the Lord, pray about it, study his word and say, what would you have me to do? And it may be to stay there and to try to bring a change of tone and of direction. It may be to venture out and do something new altogether or go elsewhere. But I really want to thank you and encourage people to not feel alone in all of this, because God is great. We know that. We forget that when we get comfortable in our stream of daily life and ministry. But when that becomes newly evident, good things start to happen. God things.
And you've seen that, and now here's what I want to do. I want to say I've loved doing plain spoken, and I've done it exactly for people like you in churches like yours, and I'm just so glad to know that my intentions actually have resembled what has happened. And so thanks for acknowledging that. I need that along the way, so I know that my what I'm aiming at is actually happening. So I couldn't be happier right now to hear that. What I think my audience would need, if you could share one anecdote. You've already shared so much that's just amazing. Oh, and I should get clear. I think you said the church you had been serving was averaging about 250 a week when you left on an average Sunday. The church you're now serving, when they very first got together, there were 100 of them that were worshiping every week. But you said you're growing. Is it a meager growth? Tell us about that growth just real quick.
Yeah, it is a meager growth. And I would say the biggest challenge for us in growth has been logistics.
Okay.
In the lodge that we're in on Sundays now, we've had young couples that have come with small children, and there's like they ask, "Where's the nursery?" We're like, "We're sorry, there is no other room but this room that we have." And so we have there are the classroom issue and being able to have studies and be able to have places to collect food for the hungry in the community. I would say logistics is the biggest challenge of that. We have grown to coming up on 150 members now, and we're averaging probably one, maybe 30 in worship. It depends on the weekend, of course, and summer's a little slower than usual. But we largely anticipate that when we get to where it is that we are going, the home that God seems to be providing for us, we will have plenty of classroom space, children's space, parking spaces, and be able to establish ourselves and do more that will be able to create the growth there. So that's been pivotal for us. And just another prayer answered in ways that we never imagined possible. And yet it's coming to pass. Did that answer your question?
No, yes, it did. It did. I wanted the last word to be a statement of, on your end, here's something that God has done for us, and you're already doing that. But if there were any other anecdotes you wanted to share about how God has seen you and your church through this time, I wanted to invite you to share that and then transition into a time of prayer for whoever decided to spend their time with us.
Yeah. I would just say keep the hope. I mean, faith, hope, and love. Remain. The greatest of these is love, of course, but stepping out in faith and keeping hope that I think God is doing something, not just with the people at the Road Church and not just in my life and in my ministry, not just in the Global Methodist Church, but something in the world that I think is going to result in a renewal of the people of Jesus Christ. I think new things are going to happen. One of the things I've really been heartbroken about in observing and watching the General Conference is the sidelining and dismissiveness of the African church, particularly, and what God has done in their presence for the past 100 years. I mean, the United Methodist Church invested so much in sending missionaries and sharing the faith there and establishing the United Methodist Church and Christianity there on that continent, and now to be told that, well, you all are just inconsequential. And I think that that seems to be very dark. What has happened with their relationship and connection with the UMC, but they should not lose hope, because God has done a great thing with them and is going to continue to do that in ways that they can't even imagine. So I just don't want people to be so defeated and deflated, because that is what our enemy truly desires in the end, is it not? For us to be null and void and inconsequential in this world.
Yeah.
So
that's wisdom. All right, brother. Well, why don't you say a blessing for those who've spent their time with us, and we'll conclude our time together.
Lord, thank you for Jeffrey and for the Plain Spoken ministry and for all of those behind the scenes that make it happen, and for the encouragement, the issues that it addresses, the hope that it provides, but also just for the connections and the sense of community in a virtual way that I have needed and benefited from, and so many others as well. Lord, be with our Global Methodist Church. Our General Conference is coming up. You know that we are starting to pray this week for every day, that to be a movement of you amongst the people of God there. And we just ask, Lord, that you would help to make happen there what needs to happen, so that others may see what is happening, others in the world, and give glory to you, our Father in heaven. Lord, be with the Road Church, of which I'm blessed to be a part of. Thank you for the ways that you have revealed yourself and shown me that there is new life ahead for me as an older pastor, to bring new life into the world in new ways. Be with every single person that is listening, that has discouragement about where they are in terms of their faith community and their denomination. Lord, help us to just remember, whatever denomination we are, whatever branch of Methodism, we all are followers of your Son and children of the Most High God because of him. Help us just to celebrate and stay grounded firmly upon his word, the living word that you have given to us in him. All this I ask and pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Mark, it's been such a joy visiting with you in this time, and I just want to thank you for encouraging me and my audience. And I do hope you have been encouraged. We serve a great God who does great things, and that's just abundantly clear from hearing Mark talk about the Road Church and all that God has done there. And he's doing a lot more than this, and so just pray that we would have eyes to see so that we can have that confidence, even in the midst of large institutional forces really working against us. As soon as this video ends, I'm going to encourage you to pray for Mark and his ministry and his church, that God would continue to bear fruit in them, especially as they're looking at the purchase of this new big property, which is very exciting. But also, I hope what comes through with this is the importance of a very basic hunger for righteousness, as known through the scriptures, as known through prayer and fasting. And yes, we are beginning a time of prayer and fasting for the Global Methodist Church. Part of it also is reclaiming the Methodist heritage, and that's a big part of what I've felt passionate about, and you have excellent resources like Timothy Tennant's book. But also, if you're interested in just kind of a primer about what I love about Methodism, I'm going to selfishly promote. If you go over to jeffreyrickman.substack.com, I've started a series. I'm 8 episodes in out of 12 on essential characteristics about Methodism that we uniquely have to offer the world, and I hope we do reclaim. So I hope you've had plenty to pray about and think about. I hope this is a blessing to you. And I just want to thank you for supporting Plain Spoken. Make sure to subscribe and follow along with continual work that I do. It's all aimed to bless you. So God bless you, and we'll be seeing you soon. Thanks again, Mark. See ya.
Thank you.